Hi crafters, it's Kathy from Scrap and Bean, and tonight I'm working with embossing powders. So I'm going to share with you just a very basic introduction to embossing. There's a lot of different powders, there's a lot of different ways to use them. Too many for one video, so I'm just going to start off with a short video with the very basics of embossing powders. There's many different powders. This one is called an ultra thick. The one I'm going to be using today is what's called a detail, or some brands will call them fine. There's some here called embossing enamels. Those are quite chunky. There's embossing glazes, which you can see through, and there is another video on that already. But the ones we're going to do today is what is a very common embossing powder that's generally referred to as detailed or fine. And that is what I like to use when I'm stamping sentiments and going to heat emboss them. And that's what I'm going to show you here. So I've taken a sentiment, the Season's Greetings, out of this stamp set from Penny Black. And I'm going to stamp it onto my scrap of paper, which is matching the project that I'm going to work on. So the idea with the powders is that you need the powders to stick. You need a medium to make them stick onto your paper and just hold them there long enough so that when you heat them, so they stay there until they're heated basically. So there's a few different ways that you can, actually there's several different ways you can do that too, but we're going to keep it simple today. Versamark is one way that you can use it. It's an ink that is a little bit sticky and it's clear, so you can use that with any of your colors or even a clear embossing powder. There's the same Versamark in the format of a pen, and that way, I mean, you can write with it, you can edge things with it, you can make little corrections with it. That's handy to have too. And another way is using the embossant dauber. So it's a different brand, but it's got similar type medium inside there. And the basic idea is that it's clear and that it holds your powder onto your surface until you get it heated and melted. You can also get these in colors. So this is basically a pigment ink in silver. And I like to use that when I'm doing silver embossing powder because just in case you get any little pieces that the powder doesn't cover it, then at least you're just seeing silver through that, through your image. And you can use any kind of generally pigment inks because they take a while to dry. So before they dry, they are going to hold on to your powder nice. So tonight I'm using the little sentiment. I'm going to use my, oh, don't do that. Just dumped out some powder by mistake. And also another tip, here's a very useful tool. This is a little pouch, an embossing pouch. It goes by, every brand calls it a different name, but it's basically a little pouch full of very fine powder. And when you put this across your background before you emboss, it just takes the static out so that these little tiny powders aren't sticking randomly just to your paper and then heat there. So first step, I just wipe that once across there. It doesn't look like you see anything, or sometimes you can see fine powder looks like a dust, but not much to see. Now I've got my sentiment on the stamping block, and I'm taking my Versamark ink pad and just going to stamp on there as if it's ink. Because it's clear, you're not going to see anything, but it's there. And then I'm going to stamp it onto my paper. And again, you're not going to see anything because it's just, if you see anything, it might look just like kind of wet, right? A little bit shiny, kind of wet. And it's there. Then for my powders, I'm going to take a piece of paper. This is just like printer paper. And my purpose is pour my powder on there, and I'm giving it a good flick just so that any powders that are just, you know, randomly sticking, like over here, I don't want them there, right? And you can still see there's some there, but when I flick it, then they all come off, or almost off. So you're just getting rid of the stray powders by doing that. And by using this printer paper, now I can put it back into my jar. Unlike this other little pile I have over there. I'll have to fix that up later. Now I've got it on there and I'm going to heat set it. I am using this embossing heat tool. You'll hear people refer to them as heat guns, embossing tools, heat tools, those heat thingamajiggies, any of that. This is what we're referring to. I like to let it warm up a little bit before I put it directly on my paper. And I do like to lift my paper up off the surface, so it allows some of the heat to come from below and above. So rather than putting it down like this and heating, I'll heat this way. And actually, I'm not getting a very sharp image. I'll see this, show that close, where it's kind of melting together. So I think I maybe smushed my stamp, pressed it down a little bit too hard. I have more paper, so I'm going to try it again. It would help if I actually cleaned my stamp off first too, but I'm not real good at cleaning things. So I'll stamp it again without pressing quite so much because I don't want it to mush. Now if you were doing a bunch of cards, of course you could just do a whole bunch of these in a row and just do them quickly, right? So put this back in the jar. I like to get it in there right away because as you see I tend to dump things. So here we go. Now maybe I can hold it enough that you can actually watch it melt. Okay, so here I'm going to do one using a stencil. I love this floral stencil design, and as you can see, I don't clean paints and everything off my stencils. And that's okay, it still works. So my first step, put my pouch of little magical anti-static down. Then I do want to put my pixie spray on the back of my stencil. And I'm going to position it about like that. And she's down. Now this time I'm going to use my dauber because I find the dauber is more effective for going through the stencil. You can use the ink pad, but what I find is because this is a smaller tip, it's just easier to press it down in through those openings, where because this, you're starting off with a flat surface, it tends to want to go onto the stencil more so than onto the paper. And my goal is to get this down onto the paper. So, because I used a stencil with so many openings here, it's going to take me a while. This might be a place to use your Versamark pen too and just go through those openings. So depending on your design and your stencil, use whichever one's going to work for you, or whichever one you happen to have in your craft room. Just trying to make sure that I'm getting all the spots. It's a little bit hard to see because it's clear, but I can tell, you know, it's shiny, it looks kind of wet. But there is a chance I'll miss a spot, and that's okay, especially if it happens on the video, because then I'll have the opportunity to show you how you can fix that. And I think I've got, well, at least most of it. Maybe pull that off of there, and already it's pretty. We have like a tone on tone going, so you might be able to see a little bit of that design. It's kind of shiny, kind of wet looking, so it's there. And then I'm going to put my powder all over this. So I'm very generous with the powder. I'm using way more than what I'm actually going to use, and that's okay. Give it a good flick, and then I can recapture that powder and use it again. Oop. Threw it right on top of my project. So now it's down there just as a dry powder. Looks kind of dull, a little bit of a matte finish, but watch what happens as we heat this up. Can you see that starting to melt? Oh, I just love it. You know, I've been doing this for years, working with embossing powder, and I'm still just fascinated with watching it melt and become shiny. And it's getting a little close to my thumb here, so we'll go the other side. Now do watch, like I do keep my heat gun moving a little bit. It's very possible to burn your paper. You can scorch it and get a burnt spot on it. You can see smoke starting to rise, so do be mindful of that, and certainly not something I would have kids do. There, so now we've got our pattern on, a nice golden shiny. Love it. And I see one little piece here where I didn't get anything, and actually it would be okay to leave it because it's not like it's that noticeable. But I'll show you if you happen to miss an area that is prominent. I have something on my stencil here. You can lay it back down right where your design was. And now it's really easy to see any spots that you didn't get. And you can just do them again. That little curl was missing. And there's some over here where I just didn't get very much. It's not solid on there, so I'll put it down again. And maybe a little there. So I'm just kind of touching it up. And now I can put my powder on there again. And I'm going to put it all over, just so that if any spots where I've touched it up, it's going to stick. Give it a good sharp snap. Reuse that powder. And then heat her up. And I can see where I need to heat, because wherever the powder is, it's dull powder instead of being that nice gloss golden look. There we go. So that's good. Now it's going to be hot, so I wouldn't touch it right away, because especially when I've got 2 layers of it on there, it's a little bit thicker, so it's going to take a little longer to dry. And if I were to touch it while it's wet, it's actually going to stick to my finger, so that it's not just a fast burn, it's going to keep burning because it's stuck there. So just make sure that you let that really dry good. If you touch the back and it's still warm, there's a good chance it's still hot. I'll do one more of these, just, I guess, because I've got it out, and you can watch it happen again. Now, where's my little embossing? Here we go. So this is just putting the anti-static over it. That's our first step. Then our next step is to put this pixie spray on my stencil, place that down wherever I want the design to be, and then emboss it. What do you call this? Clear, emboss it on there. And actually, you don't need to bang it like I'm doing. It's really just put it down there and let it. I'd probably get a better effect if I just let it get down into those grooves in the stencil. Somehow I feel like if I make noise, I'm doing something. All right, that should be the whole thing. And then our next step is to put the embossing powder, make sure it gets everywhere. Dump off the excess, even give it a good little flick. And then I'm going to recapture that powder. So same routine. And then we're just going to heat this up. So to make this into a project, I am going to mat it. I'm going to start with a black card base, but I want to put this really sparkly, this is gold glitter paper on there, and I'm going to layer that up. To kind of finish off this edge, I think I'll just, because I don't like how the paper is white on the edge there, so I'm going to use some black ink. Here we go, black soot. I happen to be using oxide ink, but any kind of black ink is going to work. And just sponge a little bit of that on my edges, and now that takes away that white core of the paper that you can see. Otherwise, just kind of gives it a nice little finishing touch on there. There. That easy, and then I'm going to adhere that down. I like using this really strong double-sided tape. And generally, I wouldn't use this much on my card because it's super strong. But because I'm trying to get it to adhere to glitter, which has actually got some chunks, so there's, you know, some valleys and some mountains there, and this tape is really only going to be sitting on the tips of those glitter pieces. So actually, it would be a good idea to put a little bit of liquid adhesive in there. So my trusty little bag here that's got everything I need. Better cover up my ink. Put some liquid adhesive in there, and that's just going to help. The liquid will go down into the valleys, and it's just going to help make sure that that does not come off. I like making projects, but I don't like repairing them later. So I like it to work the first time. So I'm just going to put some, and if it happens, some of this happens to go right on top of my double-sided tape, that's okay too. And I'm just trying to kind of center that. The benefit of using liquid glue too is that you can kind of slide this around until you get it to where you want it to be, in case you don't get it perfectly set down the first time. There we go, that's sticking really nice. Happy with that. A little bit of glue stuck out there. And then I'm going to put this down onto that base. And I see just a little bit of this card is sticking up above. So I didn't cut it quite perfect. You see more on this side where it's sticking up there. Just a hair. So I'm going to trim that off. There. Now they're both perfectly even. That looks better. But now I'm going to re-ink that edge since I cut the piece off. And then we'll put it down onto the base. And I did get the comment that I should tell you card measurements and exactly how to build your card bases. So I'll do a separate video for that. Because those of you that have been making cards, I think that would be a little bit boring for you to watch. But if you haven't made cards before, it's super easy. You just need to see it done once. So subscribe to our channel, hit that subscribe button, and then you won't miss any videos, and you'll make sure to get in on the one where I show you how to make a card. Even for people that have never done it before, because we all started someplace. Okay, and here, there we go, it's down. Now I'm going to put a sentiment, and where I stamped this earlier, actually this one's a little bit nicer maybe. Turned out a little bit better. But whatever, this is the right size. I've already cut it and a mat out of my scrap piece of the glitter paper. So again, I'm going to ink this up. That way it'll all match the rest of my card. So when I'm making cards like this, especially like for Christmas, where you're going to make several, make one, design it, make sure it turns out the way I want it, and then I just go and kind of do it assembly line. You know, do all your heat embossing, then do all your trimming of the papers. That's not coming out of there. There we go. And it makes the going together much quicker for when you have lots of cards at once. It's that first card designing, thinking of it, that takes me the most time. So I'm going to set this, glue this onto the card. But a little tip. If you realize on a card like this that you have any kind of blemish anywhere, then that's where you put your sentiment. Because if I had it up here, that would look fine. Center it, that would look fine. I could even go this direction. Actually, that might be better. Yeah, I kind of like it that direction. But if I have something on here that I want to cover up anywhere, that's exactly where my sentiment would go. But I like the look of this going the opposite direction that I actually planned on it. But sometimes those things just happen. So I'm going to put it about, oh, I'm not centered there. That's a little bit better. And then I'll put it there. And there we go. So we've done heat embossing 2 different ways. Once with a stamp and using a stamp pad, a Versamark pad. And then we've done it with a stencil using a dauber. So I hope you give those 2 methods a try, and then subscribe to the channel, watch for more embossing videos. There's a lot more ways, a lot more things you can do with your embossing powders. So there'll be some future videos doing that because I love embossing powders. Have a great day, and I hope you try something new this Tuesday.